And the childcare providers were so excited because they brought their whole families, husbands, fathers, relatives, neighbors, to see them graduate and to be called teacher. And these are women who never went to university. Most of them never went to high school. And they're now being called teacher by their community and by the government. So it's a huge, huge sense of pride. And that pride builds on itself and leads to more learning down the line.
100 connected minds.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet that we share together. My name is Shirela, founder of Cheza Cheza, which means playful in Swahili, calling in from Kenya. And together with my friend Alex from the 100 HQ in Finland. Hi, Alex.
Hello, hello.
We are hosting today's 100 Connected podcast, and we are joined today by two early childhood development, or as we like to say ECD a lot in this podcast, James and Morgan, two ECD champions. So first, let me start by introducing James, calling in from Ghana. He is the program director in both Uganda and Ghana and has been with the organization since 2013. So a very, very seasoned ECD champion. James leads all things implementation for Lively Minds in both Ghana and Uganda, where they focus on getting quality early childhood development to millions of rural preschoolers by activating the parents. So by equipping parents as ECD providers, they reach almost 300,000 children yearly for about $3 and plan to scale to 2 more countries. Welcome, James.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Then from San Francisco in the US, we are joined by Morgan Lance, the CEO of OneSky for All Children. She has been with OneSky for over 9 years, where this organization focuses on helping young children in marginalized communities in Asia thrive by training the adults in their lives in best practices on early childhood development. OneSky started its early work in Chinese orphanages and has now scaled to 3 other Asian countries and has a lot of other plans to scale home-based childcare. So welcome, Morgan.
Thank you.
I know we're on an education podcast. Most of you probably know who are listening how important ECD is. But to emphasize and share this again, I think the reason why your work is, of course, so important because 80% of brain development happens in the first 3 years. And these first 1,000 days of a child's life are extremely important. And although you are working almost at both ends of the world, we would love to explain to the listeners more about your context and why ECD is so extremely important. So let me start with you, Morgan. Could you share more about the intervention of OneSky, where it operates in the world, and why it's so important?
I think it's important to start at the start. We were founded when a couple from California adopted a young child from an orphanage in China and quickly realized the impact that having a loving caregiver in the child's life made in her future development. And so OneSky started by working, as you said, in Chinese orphanages, developing preschools and a system of nannies that supported children while they were living inside welfare institutions, and has now grown into an organization that focuses on early childhood development, particularly through the training of caregivers, both caregivers within orphanages and childcare centers, and also parents. What we see every single day and what we know from the literature is that interventions made in the first 6 years have the greatest impact of any educational intervention in a child's life. And so that's why we do what we do.
That's so interesting, and I think we'll dive further into what OneSky is doing. James, could you also share what the context is when we talk about Uganda and Ghana, and especially in the rural areas that you work? Why is ECD so important?
So ECD is so important, as both of you have alluded to, at the early stages of the child's development, that it is important that the child gets the needed support to develop mentally, socially, physically, in order to be ready for school. And for us, what we have observed is that the child's time, 75% of the child's time is spent with the parents. But policymakers, decision makers, politicians, governments have really underrated the power of parents to support their children to develop and to be school ready. And so we have seen them as sleeping giants in the provision of quality early childhood development. And our model wakes up these sleeping giants to support in providing these children the needed um, early childhood education and development needs that they need in order to get them ready. We see them as the foundation and we liken them to the foundation of a building. And so if you don't get the foundation right, then the entire education system will not work. The child's future will not work. So we try to parents who spend more time with them have the capacity to support these children to grow in order to build the foundation that will enable all children to have access to quality early childhood education.
Wonderful. Thank you, James and Morgan, for the introductions. Morgan, before we started this podcast, you already said, you're familiar with Lively Minds' work, you admire their work, and we have an opportunity to really chat with one another. Is there something that comes to mind when you hear about the work of Lively Minds and what James is doing? What would you like to, what's on?
I just love the way that James describes parents as sleeping giants and the fact that they are so often overlooked as the very first educators a child will ever have. So the fact that Lively Minds focuses on them as not just parents, but really as teachers is incredibly powerful. And it's something that we strive to do at OneSky as well.
And James, why is it that when we talk about these sleeping giants, the parents, why is it that often ECD work has focused on childcare providers and maybe left out the parents in a way?
That I will say is basically because people think that these parents, especially in the rural areas, have not been to school. And so because they have not been to school, they do not or will not be able to provide any support to their children to learn. And I also see in the work that we do, hear these parents talk about how they themselves have not been to school. There is no way they can support their children to learn. They think that they are poor and therefore the children will end up also being poor and do not have that mindset to do what they can do in order to ensure that their children do not stay in the same situation that they themselves are. And so we go to communities, and when there are meetings, for example, these parents and especially the mothers do not have the confidence to complete to discussions because they do not have access to information. And part of the work that we do is to provide them that confidence by providing them information, by building their capacity to be able to participate in providing learning opportunities to their children, and also to be able to, have good parenting practices that can also help the child's development and learning at home and in the school.
I mean, I am a very, very strong believer in learning by doing and by modeling behavior. So it's like you can say a lot, but if you as a parent have the confidence and model certain behavior, that of course will affect the child. James, maybe you've read a little bit about OneSky and the work Morgan does. Do you have any questions for Morgan and the context that she's working in?
Yes, so the question that I have for Morgan is, do you just work in rural settings, or you also do this work in urban centers as well?
We do both, James. We work in China, Vietnam, and Mongolia, and in all three countries, it is of urban and rural outreach. And much like the comment you just made about training mothers to feel a little bit more agency, it's something we do as well. We're often working in communities where the educational levels of the parents are quite low. And one of our goals is to be able to help women in these communities not only develop their own parenting skills, but potentially turn into ECD trainers themselves and go out and further the program in their communities.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question as to whether these mothers that you work with, um, educated mothers are, or both educated and those that have not been to school.
Both, both. In fact, some of our trainers in some of the more rural communities have not had education beyond grade 8 or 9. So
one of the things I'm really struck by is that you all are really trying to take this grassroots approach, right, of equipping caregivers of all kinds, educated ones, formal caregivers, parents, community members, these best practices for development. And Morgan, you've talked a little bit in some of what you've written before that child development outcomes aren't necessarily the best measure of success for this. So I'm wondering, what does it look like when you all look into these communities and you see that your work is being really successful? How are the communities different after you've been there? What does it look like for these childs to succeed for childs? What does it look like for these children to succeed in the world after they've been working with OneSky or after they've been working with Lively Minds? I'd love to open it up to either of you. Maybe Morgan, you can start us off here.
sure, sure. I could talk maybe a little bit about Vietnam, where our work is predominantly in industrial zones, providing training for childcare, home-based childcare providers who are looking after the children of factory workers. And there, it's largely a migrant community where it's very hard to track a child longitudinally because they move on from community to community. However, what we see after they've been in a OneSky trained childcare center is that they have gained, first of all, incredible confidence. That's the one thing that is constantly noted by the government when they look at a childcare center that has children who have been supported by OneSky trained childcare providers versus one that hasn't, is the children are more outgoing, they're more confident, they're more playful. When you walk into a childcare center where the woman has gone through our training, you're going to see that even with what might be considered a lack of material resources, the room has been set up in a way that provides real, deep, rich learning opportunities and great opportunities for interactions between the caregivers and the children just come alive in those settings. Beyond the basic requirement is that the settings are safer once the childcare providers have gone through the training. So yeah, I think funders are always very, very focused, understandably, on wanting to measure a child development outcome. But when you're working with a migrant population and the children are moving through your program, sometimes quite quickly, the best measure of the program's impact is the safety of the childcare center and the quality of the interactions between the caregiver and the children and the way that the children come alive and really open up to learning and to their own confidence and their own agency.
James, does any of that resonate with what you see in Lively Minds families and Lively Minds communities?
So in our case as well, these are community based. The program is implemented in the schools in Ghana and then also for Uganda in the communities. Now the schools are also in the communities, but that is the structure that the Ghana Education Service has provided. So Ghana happens to be lucky that the school system has provided for kindergarten. And so the child starts at the kindergarten. So each public school is expected to have a kindergarten where they start their education and then get ready to go to P. We implement through the Ghana Education Service, and we actually are not the implementers. The Ghana Education Service is the implementer. We, Lively Minds, only provide technical support for them to do the implementation. And so these are owned by the communities, and we don't have the direct control in terms of handling the teachers because they are not our employees. They are the employees of the Ghana Education Service. So it is the leadership of Ghana Education Service that see to it that these teachers are training the parents and then also receiving them in the school to support them to run play schemes where children are, made to sit in smaller groups to have access to teaching learning resources where they learn in turns and in rotations. In Uganda, it is at the community level, then you have the parents coming out to a particular chosen location by the community where they run the play schemes. So basically, we do this, and what we do in addition is to provide a radio program. So we have a radio program that we introduced during COVID, which also supports parents to, have good parenting practices and also simple ways by which they can help their children or play with their children as a way of helping them to learn. So that is how we also run in both Ghana and Uganda.
James, could you also speak a little bit about what does it look like for the kids? With your measurement and evaluation, what do you find are the changes in these young people as they go through the program?
So when we go to the field to see them, we see the excitement in the children. We'll see their participation, which tells how much they love to be part of the play schemes. And the teachers tell us about how the program has led to high enrollment. That means that children get to know that something new is happening in their community or KGs, and therefore they come out in their numbers. The parents that also come out to teach get sensitized, get to understand how these children are learning in the school, how they can learn. And so they also help with the enrollment drive in their communities. The teachers also tell us how those children that have participated in the program have actually become active as they progress to P1 and to the other classes. We also had the randomized control trial that we conducted during the pilot of the program, which showed that the program brought about cognitive development that happens as much as like a 1 year of schooling of the child within the period that the study was conducted. We also had socio-emotional changes that were recorded by the results of the randomized control trial. And there's some also nutritional benefits that were also recorded. Now, what we did was with the pilot, we as the technical team had close, contact with the districts and the schools helping them. So we also wanted to check whether these results will be realized at scale. And so as the program has been scaled in Ghana to 64 districts, where about 130,000 mothers have been trained and are running the play schemes and also supporting their children to learn at home in about 3,447 schools. We then wanted to see if the program is at that large scale, it will still yield the same results. So we also had a randomized control trial that was conducted for the scale. And the results are similar. So even though they are finalizing the results, the preliminary results that we have seen show that we are achieving the same results, which means that the issue has to do with once parents get to understand the various ways by which they can help their children to learn, then it becomes impactful. And I am also sure that some of the systems and tools that we put in place with the Ghana Education Service in order to maintain quality and fidelity of the implementation also helped to maintain the results that we are getting with the scale up.
So interesting to hear that, James. I think we're one step behind you in Vietnam in trying to do something similar in that we began with a direct training pilot where we were training childcare, home-based childcare providers in 3 provinces, and over time developed a agreement with the Ministry of Education to begin training kindergarten principals and vice principals to become trainers in our program for their districts. And it was a randomized control trial on the pilot, which helped give the government the confidence that we could, implement at a larger scale. So, well, Alex, you're right. I was mentioning before the podcast that sometimes child development outcomes are not the best indicator for a program like ours. They are needed at some level to gain confidence within the system, and they certainly did for us with our pilot, our CT. Now we're in the phase, much like you, James, of training government staff and building in those quality control measures that make sure that when we are not as heavily involved as technical advisors, the program can go on at the same quality. And we're really interested to see what the level of quality is as the program expands nationally. So we'll be learning from you a lot, watching what you do as we learn about the fidelity in our own program.
Yeah, we are happy to share learnings, and we are also confident that there is a lot we can learn from you as well.
Thank you.
But I
And we
can
talked
also add that we did also have a study by Thrive in the communities, trying to find out what the drivers of participation are. And that also clearly showed that in most of the communities, the mothers were participating because they knew that what they were doing was for the benefit of their children. And so even though they wish they could receive payment, but they still felt that they are doing what they are doing for their own children. And some of them are proud that in their communities, they are calling them madam. And in Ghana, literally, when you have a teacher, they refer to the female teacher as madam. And so they see themselves as teachers because the communities are referring to them as such, and they are proud of it. But one other thing that came up has to do with leadership. So in the areas where the Ghana Education Service leadership provide, were interested and committed to the program, that also saw the program activities moving on, and then having people willing and happily participating, than where you had leadership not being interested or expressing interest.
Your comment about the mothers being called madam, I love hearing that, and it makes me think about the first graduation ceremony I went to in Vietnam for our childcare provider training program. And the childcare providers were so excited because they brought their whole families, husbands, fathers, relatives, neighbors, to see them graduate and to be called teacher. And these are women who never went to university. Most of them never went to high school. And they're now being called teacher by their community and by the government. So it's a huge, huge sense of pride. And that pride builds on itself and leads to more learning down the line. I also am thinking very much about our parenting training program in Mongolia. And one of the most incredible things recently has been to see more and more fathers coming to training, to the point where we're beginning to consider setting up specific programs just for fathers, and seeing fathers who in Mongolia often work in mines far away from where their families live and only come home a few days a month, wanting to come to training to find ways to become more connected to their children, more empowered in their role as dads. So I think it's not just the women who are feeling their power from these types of programs, it's men more and more as well, which is incredible.
I love that part of the fathers' participation. We started our program by doing some experimentations with different models before we arrived at our current model. But we realized that in our part of the world, not all, in fact, in the rural communities in particular, fathers see the childcare as the role of the mother, which is a wrong perception. And that is one of the things we try to, deal with this program. So we have had to, decide to add some parenting workshops, topics that fathers will be invited to attend. And we see in some communities where fathers are very much interested, they attend the workshops. And we think that we still have some work to do to encourage more fathers to participate in these workshops and to understand that they also have a role, just as the mother, in bringing up the children. Because they see bringing up the children to just being able to pay the bills, but they don't seem to value the time that they spend with the children.
I really like hearing this about the fathers as well. Could you share more about how this approach is different from approaching mothers? Is there a very different approach? Is it a longer timeline when you want to reach the fathers? How is that different?
So the program started with dealing with just mothers. And so only mothers came out and participated. But as we started to scale the program, we acknowledge that one of the problems that we also have is not about just fathers not participating in helping the children to learn, but also not appreciating the need for mothers to have the time to come to join, but rather would prefer to have these mothers at home or on their farms. And so we introduced the parenting workshops. So the first parenting workshop that we introduced for the mothers, we also introduced for the parents. So at the initial stage, we actually do a community meeting. And that community meeting explains the program to the entire community and then encourages the men to participate. And then at the first parenting workshop, we run them separately because with the first one, if we put both of them together, the mothers may not actively participate because of the traditional thinking that the men are around and so they have to keep quiet. So we have to do the first parenting workshop for the fathers to understand their role, the importance of early childhood education, what their role is, how they can have the mothers involved, actively involved. And then in the subsequent parenting workshops, the fathers come to join the mothers and they sit together for the parenting workshops. But as I said, their attendance isn't as high as we have for the mothers.
And in your context, Morgan, is there a specific approach that you use with fathers? And like James said, making it first mothers, fathers separately, then maybe coming together, because there's a lot of cultural sensitivity, and I'm assuming in your context as well. How has that played out?
Interestingly, we haven't separated the training into a mother and father program yet. Our family skills training started first in rural China, in villages where children were left behind with grandparents when the parents went on to work in factories in the cities. And so we began our family skills training program focused on grandparents, both grandparents, when they were able, coming to training together, and have always continued along that line, that we provide the training for both mother, father, grandmother, grandfather, aunt, uncle, whoever is the main caregiver for their child. But what we're finding is, like James, women were predominantly coming to the training, men less likely. In Mongolia, we're starting to see a change. And we're still trying to get a sense of what is causing that change and how to tap into it, where more and more fathers, more and more grandfathers are coming to our trainings for parents there, and are thinking about starting our first men's group that is specifically for men, to see if that helps to attract even more fathers to the training.
And maybe if I can add, Charlie, the other strategy we use is also the radio program that broadcasts in 23 local languages on 29 radio stations across the country. We have topics that are treated or episodes that are encourage participation. And so we even encourage them to come together, sit together to listen to the radio program. That is another way of bringing them together. And the parenting, the episodes themselves also discuss how both gender can participate in, bringing up the children. And we have even gender, we do have gender roles also. So we try to demystify such things as gender rules, where it's only men that are expected to do some things and it's only women that are expected to do some things. We have parenting workshops that try to sensitize the parents on all this so that they give equal opportunities to their children, irrespective of what gender they are made of.
I love hearing about the radio broadcast. That's something that we are really interested in considering as well and learning more about, and love to learn more about your radio broadcasts. One of the ways we're using technology is we built a platform called One Big Family, and caregivers who are trained in OneSky training programs across Asia are all linked together in that platform. And there are sections, obviously, by language that are, tailored to each culture in which we're working. But it's a place where the caregivers, once they've gone through our training, can connect with each other and connect with our trainers for the rest of their lives. So I think it's so important, just as you're using the radio program, to find ways to keep in touch and to spread the word, even when we can't do face-to-face training with caregivers.
Yep. It's also great to hear from you on the use of technology. So much as we are using radio, we're also thinking of the use of technology, but we haven't started. And so that is also an area that I'm sure we can learn from you as well, as we also think of using technology to help with the work that we do.
I think we need to schedule a call, James, so I can learn about your radio program.
Sure.
And we could tell you about our learning platform.
That's right.
I've got a bit of a question for both of you. So, as we heard in the introduction, you have each been involved with your organizations for quite a while. The world has changed a lot over the past 5 years, let alone decade, let alone 13 years, James, that you've been working with Lively Minds. And I'm wondering, in this time, what has been, for you personally, as a practitioner in ECD, what has been the biggest lesson that you have had to come away with? What have you personally had to learn as you've been scaling these up? Both of you talked so beautifully about changes and challenges. So what have been some of the ones that you have confronted in your time together?
Yeah, if I can start, I will say that the lesson that I have learned. So for us, we started working with government with a plan that we provide them 2 years of technical support. And after the 2 years of technical support, government will take over, run the program, implement it, and fund it themselves. And so in order that we maintain quality, we decided to introduce some tools and performance management systems that will help them to be able to maintain quality and also ensure compliance through the performance management process and recognize high performance. Now, at the point where we're handing over to government. Government is taking over as we planned, which is exciting. So it is an exciting period. But what I have learned is that most of these systems that we took so much time to build and to train them to work with on their own, they are not able to continue to run those systems, partly because of funding and also partly because they do not fit into their systems. And so if they have to integrate into their systems, then they have to use their own tools. They have to use tools that fit into their system. They have to use performance management processes that fit into their system. So we have had to do away with some of those things that we spent time and funds developing. So the lesson to me is that when you want to work with government and then for government to take over completely, then all the systems and tools that you begin to develop should be co-created with government in such a way that you understand they can fit into their system, so that at the point of handing over, you don't have to do away with the systems that you have put in place and to begin to consider new, not new, but now working a way out to get systems integrated that will work for government. So that is one of the things that I have learned in all the period that I have been on this program.
Yeah, thank you.
James, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was thinking really the exact same thing. The level of flexibility that an organization needs to have when working with governments is probably beyond what we may have originally imagined when we started some of our programs. As James said, we spend so much time designing and testing and making sure that we've got a program that is as dialed in as it possibly can be. And then as it becomes more and more integrated into a government system, you can see all the ways that what we thought was a best practice and was most needed is not what the government needs. So it's a constant learning process. Started for us at our very earliest days when we were working in China and became the national training partner for the Chinese government to train childcare workers in orphanages, and again came in with a very robust, well-detailed curriculum, and of course it got shrunken down into something that could fit within the government system. And so we had to be really creative to think about what were the most important pieces of this program that need to absolutely remain within the system that it's going to be handed over to. Have ego, and you've got to have a lot of flexibility, and always, always, always come back to, for us, that question of what's best for the children. Is it best for us to make sure that the OneSky model is 100% followed everywhere? Or is it best to make sure that the children are getting the best care possible? And that might mean changing our model to suit the needs of the current environment or the current administration.
And as the funding landscape is changing and we see a definite shift in less funding being available, would this still be the top priorities for both organizations to say we need to work with government in order to make this sustainable? How do you see the future? So building on Alex's question, what has changed, but also how do you see the future of ECD in your context?
For us, I think the working through government to achieve scale of programs is really the best way forward in our context. But it means not just continuing to provide training, but making sure as technical advisors that we're helping to shape where we can policy, have input into laws that affect young children, and make sure that the entire system is being as child-friendly as it possibly can and as family-friendly as it possibly can. The shift in funding has been extremely difficult. Like so many organizations, we lost USAID funding. We've seen that the competition for foundation funding is getting greater and greater. And I think there's a need probably for more of us to work together and find ways to come together in programming that supports children across large areas rather than going it alone. I don't think there's going to, in the long run, be enough funding for all of the different organizations within this sector to thrive. And so I think to thrive, and if not just survive, we've got to work together.
Yeah, and we see that through so much of the organizations that partnership is really becoming increasingly important. James, I'll wonder about for you, what does it mean for government partnerships and for the Lively Minds model?
Yeah, so what it means for us in terms of government partnership, certainly there is a need for government partnership because we will not exist forever. We need to provide government the necessary support that will enable them, adopt, integrate, and then continue to implement without us. So what we have done is to refocus and change our strategy. So our initial strategy where we sought funding and then provided, government funding to implement like we do in Ghana and Uganda, we think that that is not sustainable. And given the current funding landscape, we won't even be able to get the funding to do that. And so it is better to, make adaptations to get governments at the initial stage to see how they can, implement. So what we have done is we have a new country strategy going into new countries. But as we go into these new countries, we have designed the program such that we have the full program, and then we have the adapted program, which is much cheaper than the full program. And we do allow governments to decide what they want. But once they get to know that they are going to implement this program from their own budget from the onset, and they choose what they can do that, then it means they are budgeting for it and they are going to implement that. That is the strategy that we are using. So currently, we have our teams ready to move into the Gambia, and then also the Oromia region in Ethiopia, where they are ready to take up an adapted parenting program to implement. And so in that situation, we will only be giving them the technical advice. We will not be involved in implementation. They will do it on their own. Then we also think that focusing on our radio is a good strategy because the radio is less costly and then also has a larger reach. And we can use that radio to still deliver the parenting course for parents and at the same time provide the parents support to help them to continue to play with their children. That will help them to learn and get ready for school.
Thank you so much. That was very great to hear. And I think a lot of other ECD providers all over the world can learn a lot from your journey. I want to give Alex our final question to you both.
Yeah, we always like to have a moment of reflection and looking ahead with our guests. So, as a way to close out our episode today, I'd love to hear what you all each have as your dream for the future of education. And you can speak either as Morgan and James or as representatives of Lively Minds and OneSky. Entirely up to you. But maybe, James, we can start with you. What is your dream for the future of education?
My dream for the future of education is the world, especially the less developed areas, the rural areas, the hard to reach areas, have equal opportunities. So they are able to gain quality early childhood education and have equal opportunities to compete with their colleagues elsewhere. And so overall in the world, all children should have equal opportunities and can, compete in their lifetime.
Thank you.
The same. I dream of a world where every child, regardless of their circumstances of their birth or the community resources around them, have access to safe and quality care, whether at home or in a professional care environment, and that they are able to go into kindergarten at the same level and with the same access as peers from communities that might have more resources.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and especially for the message around early childhood development and being champions in this space for quite a long time. And also emphasizing that, of course, you live in maybe contexts that are less developed, but this is something that is universal for every child. Every child wants to be seen, wants to be safe, wants to be nurtured, wants to be loved. And this is something that every child anywhere in the world deserves. And therefore, I'm very happy that we could share this with the world. And thank you for the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for this episode.
The 100 Connected podcast is a creation of the Connection Committee, Annette Tachaf, Sherelle Trippers, Hanukkah Mackey, and Lindsay Stewart, and is produced by 100 and edited by me, Alex Shapiro. Learn more about 100, its innovations, and our community by visiting our website at 100.org.